conspiracy. I didn't know that the Flat Earth Society was an actual society. I thought it was a derogatory term that you threw out to people who you considered had outdated thinking. Um, Now, this came into my awareness about 2 months ago, maybe less, 6 weeks. And it was presented to me by a friend on Facebook who sent me a video and said, "Am I out of my mind? Or is there something to this?" And I watched the video that they linked me to, and I had to respond with, "If you're out of your mind, so am I." Now, if you've never, what's the word? If you've never questioned NASA or its validity, if you've never questioned the space agencies in general, if you've never questioned the Apollo missions, if you've never questioned the moon landings, then this may well be one of the biggest leaps we're asking you to make over the next couple of hours by considering the information. I have. I came to the conclusion a long time ago that the moon landings were not legit. I don't believe that the Apollo missions were as presented. So this wasn't such a leap for me to question the space agencies and what they've put out there for us. But so I'm just going to ask you to suspend your disbelief for the next couple of hours as we look at the information, we ask the questions, and the implications. The reason why this, in my opinion, is the most ridiculed is simply because of the implications and the audacity involved. The sheer audacity to attempt to hide the very ground we walk on, our environment, and our relationship to ourselves and our creator, God, whatever that is, because it's all involved. The implications are that big. And I think it's just, it's just too big. But we're going to do our best today. So I'd like to welcome my guest, Mark Sargent. Welcome, Mark.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited because, like I said, if this is true, this is the mother of all conspiracies.
Indeed.
How do you hide the world?
How do you hide the world? Do you want me to?
I'd firstly like to ask you why you even started questioning this. How did this come into your awareness?
This came out into my awareness out of sheer boredom.
Okay.
I was out. Let's be honest here. Like a lot of conspiracy people, if you've done it for a long enough time, you've looked at stuff and you've gone through the gamut of all the conspiracy. We won't go necessarily into them now. But there was one conspiracy that absolutely, for the conspiracy crowd, is radioactive. Nobody touches it. It's ridiculous. It's laughable. It's ludicrous. And even I wouldn't look at it. In fact, I would go through old stuff 10 times over before I would look at it. And it was known as the Flat Earth Theory. And so, in fact, it sort of bugged me that I wouldn't look at it because it was like a folder on your desk and it was almost embarrassing to touch. So I set out to prove this, the globe. I said, okay, I should be able to knock it out in 2 or 3 days. Piece of cake. Because it's easy. And it's what you and I, grew up with. It's what we know, which is what I'll get into in a second. And I stared at this thing. I tried to prove this model for about 9 months. And after that 9 months, I realized that every time, every layer I went deeper in, it just got flatter and flatter to the point where then I was questioning, how did we come to this? Then I was questioning, okay, when did it become a globe? I started to really wonder how we got to this point. And it started, it starts at a young age. And here's where people don't, they don't understand. Because I've asked people, I say, how do you know this is where you live right now? Right. And the first reaction is almost always the same as, well, we know. That's just, that's what we know. And what I mean is they equate it with things that are absolutely given. Water is wet, fire burns. That's gravity, right? And it's like, okay, but they're equating this shape, which is really just an image, with those other things, givens. You can test. That's the thing. You can test water. You can test fire. You can test gravity all day long. We all know those things to be true. But this is one of those things where, it's like, how do you know for sure? And then the second question comes in, which is, well, or the second response from them, which is, well, they've got the picture. NASA told us. And, then the riddle comes out. And I'm not going to take credit for it. And it's like, okay, how do you know this is what where you live without using the word NASA? And that's where it stumps them. And, that was the beginning for me was, okay, now I've got to come at it from the other direction. Now it's not a question of if it's flat, it's how was the globe created? How was the real world hidden? How do you hide the world?
Well, when I started looking into this, what I looked at was all the ancient cultures and religions.
Yeah.
And they almost all, for the most part, have an identical image and terminology.
Yep.
A lot of the old ancient cultures, including the Australian Aboriginal, which was not easy to find, talks about, they make references to an egg of some sort. That it's a contained environment, which is where the dome sort of conversation comes in. But that it's flat was universal.
Yeah.
That through religion and culture, all the way back. So when did it go from being this flat plane to being a globe?
And yeah, perfect point. And for those people out there that don't know their history, and you really should know your history, is for the first 4,500 years, if our records, go fairly seamlessly, go back, say 5,000 years, the first 4,500 years, all the cultures and religions pretty much agreed on the same sort of thing. It was a flattish, I say flattish, not perfectly flat, and we'll get into that as we go on, flattish circular area that was enclosed one way or the other, with either a permanent barrier or a semi-permanent barrier, that everything was easy to manage, and that's where it was. And then during one of the scientific revolutions in the 1500s, it was proposed by Copernicus and others that using some very leap of faith math projections, saying, yeah, if this is spinning at 1,000 miles an hour and going through space at 60,000 miles an hour, then yeah, you can build a solar system, and that's what our world looks like. And that stuck because why not? It's like anything.
But wasn't it eventually a church that one of
the church had to jump on board?
Church of England or something.
Yeah. Once
later ones took it on.
Yeah, and I don't know exactly who were the first ones to jump on board, but once they jumped on board, and people, because actually, from an image point of view, this is pretty cool. No question. It's a lot cooler than a disc. You can, it's spherical. People completely identify it, with the whole spherical thing. It's a children's toy. It's the shape of fruit. It's real easy to do. But the church adapted as quickly as they could, because then you've got a problem, because if you can't have the church saying that it's a flattish thing with a firmament and have science saying that it's a globe. You can't have the two, because at that point the church may start losing followers. So the church saying, okay, well, they can interpret their religious text a certain way, and they'll sort of kind of bend into the globe model, and that worked. And so everyone was on board with it. Everybody was happy. There was a problem though, and that was you couldn't prove it. And by that I mean they were centuries away from proving it. It's not like nowadays, where you can prove all sorts of stuff and you may have to wait a little while. They were, this was 1500. The first balloons, that could carry people weren't for another 200 years. The planes weren't for another 400 years. Honestly, it wasn't until the last 60 years ago that the rocket program was able to go up high enough to take a picture of this. But if they did take a picture of this, they didn't release it. In fact, they didn't release any pictures until, and depending on who you look at, and we'll look at the picture a little bit later, until either 1968 to 1972, and they only released one picture. So then it was part of the mystery. But I don't, I might be getting out of my timeline here. So what direction you want to take?
Well, I like the fact that you set out to prove the globe.
Yeah.
And it just isn't doable from the standpoint that you approached it from. And what I want to let people know is that Mark caught my attention because he put up a series of videos on YouTube called the Flat Earth Clues, 1 to 10. 10's just been put up.
Yep.
And we're going to sort of step through those clues, giving a synopsis of what each of those videos mean.
Okay.
And I suggest everyone go back and have a look at them for more information on each of those clues. So you approach this from okay, if I was going to create this planet and I was going to do it as a flat Earth model, just purely from a design standpoint, how would I create it? And how would I create it in such a way that the people would never discover that that's the way it looks?
Yeah, and what I initially did, because I came from a computer game design background, I initially went in saying, okay, I still don't buy it. I'm still not on board completely, but what I'll do is I will try to create the design of the flat model, the enclosed world. And if I get to any point in that where something just does not jive, I'm just going to abandon the whole thing and say it's crap, and people, shouldn't listen to this ever again. And as I was working through it, the design just got better and better to the point where everything that you can think of that is done in a globe model is actually easier in a flat model, way easier to do. And from the oceans to the continent layout to the temperature levels on the borders to the temperature and oxygen levels in the top, that brilliant design feature they put in. You add 3% salt solution to the oceans, and you reduce ocean discoveries by 95%. It's like the whole thing was designed to keep us, and we'll look at the video stuff in a second, but keep us in some sort of a natural state, like it was part of an education system combined with some entertainment. People said, well, isn't it, aren't you really kind of building a jail? And I go, no, not at all. Because if it's a jail, it's a very beautiful and very comfortable jail, and there's no bars in the windows, so people don't even know that they're in an enclosed system, which made it even more amazing. But yeah, as I built more and more layers onto this, I got to the point where I realized, okay, now we're talking about a flat model, but if it's flat model, how do you hide it from everyone? And that's the tricky part. Do you want me to get into that now, or do you want me to talk about the clue stuff? Or
I do want you to talk about the clue stuff, but you just brought something up, which is, and I don't know whether you've got an opinion on this or whether your research has led you to think one way or the other, but
sure.
The question for me is, so we've got the whole planet believing that the world is flat.
Yep.
Copernicus and his cronies decide that it's a globe.
Yep.
I'm trying to figure out still at this point whether that was a deliberate deception back then.
Yes, yes, it is. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry. And that what happened when? Oh, how do I work with this? So it's a deliberate deception back then.
Yep.
For whatever reason, which we can get into. And they get to a point where eventually they have to prove this fraudulent concept, or Copernicus was genuine in his belief. It was adopted because it was convenient. And it's not until NASA comes along in the 60s and starts sending anything up there far enough for them to realise, or even Bird earlier, that they go, oh shit, hang on, it is actually flat. And at that point decide to maintain the status quo. So I'm still in two minds about which one this may have played out.
From my point of view, there is little doubt in my mind the globe model was introduced by whoever built this enclosed system artificially sometime back in the 1500s. And I know that sounds wild, but I don't believe the Copernicus, who, by the way, didn't even publish this until the day, made sure it was like in his will, like the day after he died, which is also interesting. But I think it was introduced hundreds of years ago as a natural process to slow down, so people, because technology, eventually was going to get to the point where people were going to find the edge. But even then, I think it was kept secret. So, but it was one of those things. So for people out there that aren't quite getting this yet, imagine a conspiracy so big that even the power elite, even the authority, don't know for sure because they have no way to figure it out. So let's say, just pick a couple off the top of my head, the Illuminati or the Masonic, or, pick any old group, let's say they get a map that shows them, what the world really looks like. Well, who does that benefit, in the 1500s or the 1600s? Nobody, because, you've got wooden ships. Your explorers aren't going to be doing much. There's no internal combustion engine. And so they just sit on it, but it's still in the back of their heads, right? So we go forward to the 1920s, after the internal combustion engine is made, and you start sending out explorers. The most notable being Admiral Byrd from the United States, who does the North Pole in 1926. And then he is recruited and sent down to the South Pole, what we call the South Pole, in 1928. And from 1928 until 1954, he does 4 series of expeditions. And there's little doubt in my mind that that's what they were looking for. Sort of like an Indiana Jones thing. It's really cool in that sense, where he's just going down there and he just keeps exploring, because Antarctica is so vast, millions of square miles, that he just keeps exploring and keeps exploring. And I don't even know if they told him, what, because, the interview, which we'll get into in a second, I don't even know if he knew for sure. He was definitely on point. He was totally funded. And, he was also a Mason, not that that really has anything to do with it, but I don't think they let him in on it. So at the end of 1954, he comes back and does that television interview in the States for CBS, where, and I think at that point they had almost given up. Meaning, again, this thing's so big that the power elite were going, well, we already sent him 4 times and he hasn't come back with anything. So maybe there's nothing there. Maybe this map, this ancient map that we got, is wrong. And, because he's talking about the resources and how they're going to do expeditions every year and all these countries are down there and everything's great. And then that's Murphy's Law for you. They make all these plans. It's like, well, at least we'll make a lot of money off of it. And then in 1956, that all changed. 1956, this world changed. And most people have no idea how nutty it got after 1956. We were distracted with all sorts of things, Roswell and all sorts of, other conspiracies. But this one was the one that really, the moves that were made were so broad and so decisive that every time I looked at it, I just cringed. I was going, oh my, the things they were doing were so absolute. They didn't take chances on anything. It wasn't like, they made no mistakes, in my opinion. Well, maybe one sort of mistake, but everything that was done to hide this was done with massive broad strokes. And
all right, well, let's step everyone through the clues.
Through the clues. Okay, so
you'll get to that and be able to build on it.
Yeah. So so by the way, people, if you're on YouTube, it's Flat Earth Clues, but at this point it's getting so much traction, you don't even have to. You could Google Flat Earth Clues, and it'll come up. Apparently, I coined that. I have no idea how that happened, because I would have thought after the 9/11 September clues, people would have jumped all over different clue stuff. But that's fine. Hey, great, wonderful. I'm not trademarking it, so if anyone wants to steal it, go ahead. So I initially started out by just making a guide. That's all I wanted to make, was one thing, which was called the Flat Earth Guide, or the Guide to the Flat Earth, depending on which way you look at it. And, it ran like 15 minutes, and it was kind of, just an overview of things. And then the night after I released it, I realized I was going, there's these little nagging things I got to talk about. And the more I started looking into it, the more, the more clues I was doing, the further along I was going. They were building on each other to the point where when I got number 8, I was going, oh, this is it. I got to the point where it's like, yeah, I'm going to preach this. Label me whatever you want. Label me, a tin hat crazy person. But if I sound like a crazy person, no one's called me on it yet. Nobody's emailed me and said you sound crazy. Because again, I was supposed to debunk this. This is not supposed to be what the world, I'm not supposed to be preaching what the world looks like, but that's where I am. So the first clue I did was empty theater. And the short version of that was, do you want me to go down and talk about each clue and kind of branch off, or do you want me to just go boom, 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 boom?
Whatever you feel.
Okay.
At this point, whatever you feel pertinent.
So empty theater covered a little thing that most people don't know. In fact, nobody knows. In fact, I'm the first YouTube person to do it. I have no idea why it was missed, which was why one of those little things, because people can talk about the moon missions and NASA and make fun all they want. But what for me, what I thought was very interesting was, especially, in the States where we make tons and tons of movies that are just crappy and horrible, is that the greatest achievement in human civilization, supposedly, nobody's ever made a movie about, and that would be the moon landings. And it's staggering to me. And as I was doing research on it, I realized that there seems to be, it was part of the deliberate thing to just keep people from even thinking, even questioning, that take the globe out of their head for whatever reason. People don't understand, 50 something years later, after the space program, reached its pinnacle, nobody ever made a movie about it. The closest thing ever was the Right Stuff in 1983, which really was just an astronaut recruiting movie more than anything. And that was made 12 years after the last Apollo mission. And then no other movie was made until 1995, I believe. That was 12 years after that with Apollo 13. And that was it. Nobody made a movie off of it. And
so there's never been a major Hollywood film that details the actual landing and has scenes of the astronauts on the moon.
No, and it's staggering to me because people, especially in the entertainment industry, they know full well the crap. The remakes that
we've made movies with them landing on asteroids and comets.
Oh yeah, and
distant planets and. But yeah, that's kind of, you have to ask the question, why not?
Yeah, and that reinforces it. And the people, like The Right Stuff, for example, that was set up for a sequel. It was pushing 3.5 hours in the 1980s, which is just obscenely long in the 1980s for a movie. And it ended with, the first Earth orbit. So people are going, oh, well, there's a sequel, coming. It made money. It won Academy Awards. It's not like it was a rinky-dink production, big name cast. And the sequel never got made. No one talks about it, and the reason is, and you'll see it if you get into the clue. I'm not doing it necessarily justice here. The reason is because if the movie is too spot on, if the production is too close to the original, then you're going to have that weird, funny feeling. It's like, okay, what am I looking at exactly? Plus, you're exposing Hollywood to that. Production people are going, oh yeah, you know how it would go. At the backstage, it's like, oh geez, this is probably what they did to do the moon landings, and then you just can't let them touch it. So for whatever reason, no movie's ever been done to recreate the moon missions. Even now,
Did you watch the Jay Weidner series, Kubrick's Odyssey?
I did, and I also mentioned the one I liked, Room 237. Which was, the brilliant thing for those people out there. And I won't go into it in great detail here, but Moon 237, a fantastic documentary about the Stanley Kubrick question, which was, because I don't think it's rumor at all, which was if he was hired by the Department of Defense in 1963, given an unlimited budget and said, look, show us what we can do to simulate the space program on film. He milked that thing for 5 years, and it soured him greatly at the end. And at the end, he released 2001: A Space Odyssey, probably the finest space simulation in the history of cinema, even now, even though it's decades old. But he was so upset by it that the rumor is, and again, I don't think it's rumor, is that when he did the 1980 movie The Shining, he built in the confession of him working on the space program into the movie The Shining. And you can see it, watch the documentary. Kubrick was, in my opinion, the greatest director of all time. And it was just a genius at setting things up. And he put little hidden clues because he couldn't talk to any about it.
Well, even if Kubrick didn't do it, I think what Jay was able to show is the technology was there.
Absolutely.
In the 60s to pull that off.
Yeah, no question. Anyway, let's jump to the other clues. Just we'll come back to what happened down in Antarctica in a second. So number 2 is the Byrd Wall, and that one really, I'll get in a little deeper into that one because that one for me was my point of no return, which was when I was looking at it. By the time I finished the Byrd Wall, the clue number 2, I was hooked. There was no turning back for me. It was over, and that was what happened in Antarctica. And people just, again, it's one of those hidden things that people don't know. I've talked, I could talk to 1,000 people on the street and none of them know this, which was when they were looking for the enclosure, the edge, or you want to call it the firmament, whatever religious text you want to use. When they were looking for it, it appeared that they found it in 1956, because in 1954, they were going to make a whole bunch of money. And I know it's an old gag from my other interviews, but I'm going to show it to you anyway. And that is, it's the old comedy routine, which is, where the hero, they go one direction and then they change the other direction. So one day it is, we are going to be in Antarctica for the next 100 years and make a ton of money. Then they see it. We are out of here. And they all left, all the nations left at the same time. United States, Russia, Great Britain, Chile, Australia, New Zealand, everybody, they all left at the same time. And what happened after that was immediately Russia and the United States, who happened to be both down there at the same time, started up their rocket program. Immediately after that.
And the treaty.
Well, yeah, that came as they were doing the rocket program, because think about it this way. If you found the outer edge, okay, now you got to figure out, okay, what's the upper enclosure like? But you don't have a rocket program to test it. And the only rocket programs was the old Nazi programs, the V2s. So the Russian America, they start doing their rocket programs in 1952. And then for whatever reason, they decide they're going to put nuclear weapons on the top of these things in 1958. And they just start firing them straight up. And I'm not going to get into the nuclear weapon debate right now. We'll just assume that nuclear weapons are real and everything's cool. And they start firing rockets up in 1958. And, and the third or fourth shots were big hits, 3.8 megaton, that type stuff.
You know what altitude they got?
I'm sorry, what?
Altitude.
Oh, it varies. It depends. That's all listed in Wikipedia, but I don't know if you can trust the altitudes. I mean, some said, someone went up 40 kilometers, some went up 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers. Oh, and, let's not forget that one of the package, the series of tests was called Operation Fishbowl, which I was like, oh, really? That's what you throw out there? That's the most creative name you could come up with? It's like, you're not even going to hide that? So,
do you know off the top of your head how many nuclear bombs they set off up there?
Officially, yeah, I can tell you in 1 second here. If anyone wants to look this up, and I'm not going to share my screen just to show you, you just look up high altitude nuclear explosion.
So just going over the timeline again.
Yeah.
You've got Byrd going down there over how many years? Did
1928 to 1956. He went down there, a total of, I think, 5 expeditions, at least 4, I'm pretty sure 5. And on the 5th one, he finds something.
And you've got all these countries down there at the time.
At least
crossing at the mouth.
Yeah, because there are the resources that are down there are infinite. In fact, Byrd on national television, again, watch this. The guy's not, he's the most credible man in America at the time. He's the youngest admiral ever. He's a fleet commander. He's doing all this stuff. And he goes, oh, yeah, there's an entire mountain range made out of coal that could supply the entire world with coal. There's oil, there's minerals, there's uranium, there's all this stuff. And there's a whole section. That's just the stuff they found. And of course, that's the foreshadowing. It's like, oh yeah, there's a whole nother section of land bigger than the United States we haven't even flown over yet. No one's, even I haven't seen it. He's, because he's the explorer. So right after that, he goes down there, and so in 1956, they find it, right? what I consider to be, the edge or the barrier or a marker, whatever it is. But for whatever reason, they decided they wanted to fire nuclear weapons straight up starting in 1957. And I'm sorry, 1958. The rocket program started in 1957. So in 1958, they start firing nuclear weapons, and I'm looking at the shots. The shots started April 1958 with Operation Hardtack. The United States followed with Operation Argus.
Did you say heart attack?
No, hardtack. It's I think that's a cowboy food thing. I'm probably butchering it, but it doesn't really matter. Operation Argus. The USSR did their test starting in 1961. Operation Fishbowl started in 1962, and there were several failures, I think, in 1962.
Do you know what the official reason given was for
no, do you need a reason to, you can make up whatever reason you want, and back then it's like, well, we're just doing nuclear testing because nuclear weapons were so new. But here's what gets interesting. So 1958, they're firing up weapons, and they keep firing. But right after that first, so it's this chain of events, and you're going, what's the old saying? I love it so much. I believe in coincidences, but I've never seen one. That's what happens here, which is right after that first or second shot with I think it was like the 3.8 megaton shot that they did in August. They formed NASA right afterwards. So you find the outer edge, you fire your biggest gun you have straight up. That's not working. All right, we got to control the skies. We formed NASA, right? 9 months after they formed NASA, they seal off Antarctica permanently. And that's the staggering thing that most people don't understand. It's like people don't understand. You can take a vacation to that little peninsula on the outer part of Antarctica, but everything else is completely sealed off. The treaty was created, and anyone can look it up, in 1959. 10 nations signed it, and they basically banned any country from doing anything on Antarctica ever. And this isn't like an Area 51 thing where you're sealing off part of Nevada, with fences and guard dogs and that sort of stuff and scary signs that saying don't come in here. They sealed off the entire continent. That's the equivalent of shutting off the Americas after Panama Canal. Just putting a gate there and saying, oh yeah, nobody goes to South America for the rest of history. And that's what they did. They sealed off Antarctica permanently, and every nation, once they became technologically viable, as an economic power, they were forced to sign it. How does that work? Oh hey, we just became a country, a technologically tradable country. Oh yeah, by the way, sign this document. You don't get to go down to Antarctica. For how long? Well, forever. You don't get to go down there. So that was 1959. And they kept firing, meanwhile, they keep firing up the rockets, but they're not sending up the big stuff anymore. Because I think once you realize that megaton isn't going to cut it, at that point you just have to probe. What I think they were doing was, I think they were probing the arc, the dimensions of it, because at that point they had to figure out the space, because it would benefit them for the space program. Meaning you need to know the limits of what you could do in simulating a space program. So the United States and Russia both stopped firing nukes at the exact same day. And people say, oh, it was a moratorium over aerial testing. It's like, that's a bunch of crap. No, they called each other. We've never been enemies. The Cold War is an absolute sham. They were both in on it the entire time. They were, because they were both on the ice at the same time. They were there when we were there. They knew it. Do you think Russia would have voluntarily left? They were trying to rebuild after World War II. So was Great Britain.
There's two obvious discussions that we're not having.
Yeah.
Right. And we won't end up going into them today because they're a whole other tangent.
Okay.
But we might do on another occasion.
Okay.
One would be, because you can't talk about Admiral Byrd without mentioning Hollow Earth.
Oh yeah, because he's the legend of Hollow Earth. Yeah,
the legend of Hollow Earth.
Yeah,
and that is another discussion.
Yeah, it is. And unfortunately, it is. It's another discussion. But it does not conflict with this model at all.
No, I realize that now.
Yeah,
I did initially think it did. But, and the other one is the German Nazi presence.
Yeah, there's that.
So there's that.
I talked about this in another interview, but I'll give you the 30-second breakdown of that. And that is, yeah, there's Operation Hardtack, which was the, oh Lord, I think it was definitely the one right after World War II in 1956. I'm sorry, 1946, where Admiral Byrd was the fleet commander, and he led an entire carrier group, 13 ships down there, 5,000 men, and to do something. Now, the rumor is that the Germans were also looking for it. Again, it's got that great Indiana Jones feel. Somebody in Hollywood, make a movie out of this. I know you won't be able to, but at least get the script going, because the Germans would have been looking for the Edge too. And they, the Germans, how technologically, up they were at the time. It's like, sure, well, while we're in World War II, because during World War II, we weren't down there. The expeditions weren't going down there, but the rumor was that the Germans were. So if they would have found something eventually, or, maybe they kept it a secret, maybe they were just looking, maybe they didn't find it either, but the Americans wanted to root them out. So the story goes that in 1946, even though Germany officially surrendered, a year earlier, they went down there to take care of it. And for me, it was like, I didn't dwell on it too much, because whatever they did down there in 1946, it was done. It was taken care of, because, Byrd, again, fleet commander in 1954 on television, he was perfectly fine, didn't seem nervous at all. Nobody ever, the Nazi story wasn't even an issue back then. So, whatever they took care of, they took care of it. And then they just started up their expeditions again after that. So anyway, sorry, didn't mean to go on a rant.
No, that's okay. But they are two conversations that I think are worth going into just at a later date.
Yeah, and
we're not ignoring them on purpose. We're just trying to
no. And I put that in one of the videos. I was going, look. In fact, I was lucky, because when I started down this path, I knew about Admiral Byrd and the Hollow Earth theory. And I was going, I was reading his bio, and I was going, yeah, Hollow Earth, blah blah blah. And then I all of a sudden realized, it's like, well, he changed direction, and he was pretty much ordered to, it's like, focus all your energies on the South Pole. And that's where he spent from 1928 till his death in 1957. That's where he spent all his time. So anyway, but that's a whole other thing. So
okay.
Where was I? So anyway, all the funny stuff started happening in 1959, and by 1962, the nuke stuff had stopped, and then the space program started up. And then again, if you believe in coincidences, that's when the whole moon programs, in 1963. Oh yeah, by the way, that's when Stanley Kubrick started making 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is an interesting story in itself. And then the whole reason for that was, and again, this is for people out there that just don't, they're not quite getting it yet. And that was, here's the problem. Eventually, but you have to control the skies. If you're trying to hide it, one of the first things you got to do is you have to militarize the space program. And I mean worldwide. And so Russia and America, again, never enemies. They are not enemies. They've never been, not at the highest levels. At the highest levels, they have been friends. And I don't want to get into it too much here, but they were, their space program was being faked at the same time ours was, and they gave up later, or they toned it down because they realized we were better at, well, because we had guys like Stanley Kubrick. We figured out a way to pretend. But the point was, sooner or later, despite 20 generations of a globe being handed out in classrooms, 500 years worth of globes, eventually someone had to produce a picture. And I say produce rather than take, because if it's flat, you can't take a picture of this. So how do you fake it? Unfortunately, you can't just, now we had the artistry, we had the ability to produce a picture, and maybe I should share one for you. Want me to try this with the share screen?
Sure.
Okay. So if I say share screen.
It isn't, I mean, and it is a fact.
Yeah.
We've had a space program now since the 60s.
Yeah.
And there is one photograph.
Yeah. And are you seeing my screen?
Yes, I am.
Okay. This is the photograph right here. This photograph back in 2000, when I was actually looking for photographs of the Earth from space, this is the only photograph that NASA has officially released of the Earth from space. And you can always tell it's this photograph because it's got that neat little crescent cloud thing here. But this photograph also killed two birds with one stone. You would have thought that if America was doing the space program, they would have taken a picture of the North American continent. But what they did was they took a picture of the bottom part of Africa and then what they claim to be Antarctica, and a whole lot of cloud cover. Don't think for a second that that's accidental. They want want this to be as obscured as possible. But this was the only picture that was in any textbook, that was in any classroom. And then when the internet fired up, it was the only picture online. Well, like when 2000, when I was looking for these pictures, literally it was just rows and rows and rows of this image. And you got to ask yourself, why would there only be one image from space? 2000, we had plenty of cameras and supposedly, all sorts of stuff up there, but nobody was taking a picture of the Earth. So should I get out of this?
Now, while you're looking at it, while it's up.
Okay, go ahead.
Question: the background, the blackness of space.
Oh yeah. Why?
Why is it? This is something that, without even realizing that I was questioning it, for the reasons that I am now.
Yeah.
The model that I've always seen, this enormous sun, miles away from us,
92 million miles, if you believe the story.
92 million miles.
Yeah.
That hits our tiny little planet.
Yep.
Bathing it in light.
Yep.
That means that light is traveling out in all directions. Why is space black? The blackness of space. That was just one of those things. I don't get it. Like, why isn't space all lit up with sunlight?
Good point. Good point. Excellent.
What is the argument for that? What's the scientific reason for that? Did they say something about it? It doesn't actually emit light. It's only when it hits our atmosphere or something.
It depends what you're looking at. The easiest thing, like for example, like this picture here, there's no stars in the background.
Oh, yeah, that either.
Yeah, the biggest problem they had, and I don't want to throw in the moon stuff too much because I didn't touch about it in the videos, but the big problem is math. And that is, if you're simulating this, if you're simulating that Earth, that's not so hard. The hard part is the constellations in the background. Because if you show the constellations in the background, and this image is date stamped or time stamped, you're going to have to be real accurate on where nowadays it's easy, but so they did anticipate this, like, okay, maybe years in the future, somebody with a computer is going to figure out, of course, now anybody can figure out with a computer, that if the Earth is in that position, then like say Orion's belt has to be over here or have over here, but it's got to be exactly that place. And if it's not, then you get a problem, which is why the moon mission, that was there, and we'll get into some of the reasons why, the other stuff. But that's why that was their answer for the moon, which was they couldn't figure out, it was going to be way too hard, especially in the 60s, to try to figure out exactly where the stars were when an astronaut was standing in this position on this day, because everything was date stamped. So their argument was, let's just remove the stars entirely and just not talk about them, and then make sure the astronauts don't say anything about the stars. And Neil Armstrong almost blew it in that Apollo 11 interview, if you ever listened to that, because they asked him about the stars, and he kind of was getting all fudgy on it. And the other two guys, that were standing next to him, I think it was Aldrin and the other guy, they were like going, dude, it's like, no, there's absolutely no stars. But he was on the fence there for a second.
I did see, I think he was a NASA whistleblower, sort of looked like a cowboy in a truck, talking about there is no sun and there are no stars.
Oh, Eric Dollard. Interesting guy. He's some people call him the new Tesla, the new Nikola Tesla, and I don't necessarily agree with that. He is very, very smart though, and he did this weird interview where he was sitting in I don't know if it was a truck or a car, but he was some film student was interviewing him. People can look it up on YouTube. It's easy to find. Just look up Eric Dollard, Dollard. And here, let me kill this. Do you want me to leave this up, or do you want me to kill it?
Yeah, whatever you like.
Okay, so he was being interviewed, and when people seem to be locked in on something, he was basically talking about the sun. He's going, the sun is, he goes, it is not what people think it is. It is, he goes, it is giving off light. He goes, but there's no fusion there. He goes, there's nothing behind it. He goes, it's hollow. He goes, it's like a, because he was a really big, I don't believe in everything he says, but he's really up on electricity and how things generate light and how, energy is transferred. And he's going, look, he goes, I don't really know the sun. He goes, nobody knows what the sun is. He goes, but it's not what you think it is. It is not a giant atomic explosion. He goes, it's almost like it's electric, like it's generating light from somewhere else. And at that point, in the flat design model, I picked up on that in 2 seconds. It's like, well, yeah, that would make perfect sense, because in a flat design model, you don't have to have it 92 million miles away. You can literally have it, as long as it's super bright, to keep people from staring at it and figuring it out. It could be only a couple hundred miles away, and no one would ever know the difference. Basically, what I'm saying is the distance that they put on, 92 million miles away. That's just what NASA's telling you it is. They don't know, no different than the Earth's core, which we'll get into later. So, but yeah, Eric Dollar, look him up. He's an interesting guy to listen to, definitely.
We've got a couple of questions coming in, but just to let the person who's writing them know, we'll get to that. We will.
Okay. Let me blow that past some of the other clues. So clue number 3 was map makers, which was a very interesting one to make, because, in fact, I can pull that up on my screen. For some people that don't understand how the world looks, like everyone's seen this. This is, the classroom look. You recognize this, right? Yep. So this is when you pull down the map in front of the blackboard. This is the one we've been looking at for at least 100 years, which is the Mercator map. And most people don't understand that it's not even close to being accurate, right? It is. They uniformly do stuff to where it gives a for shipping lanes and countries prominence and stuff like that. But that's not really what it looks like. What it looks like is, let me make sure I get it right here, is this. That is what if you laid out the map flat, that is the perspective. And people say, oh, it looks like kind of skewed, but it's really what it is, because Greenland is way, way smaller than Africa. Europe is tiny compared to South America. South America is huge, but if you look at this map, it equals things out. Europe looks about as big as South America. But the point is, the reason why I brought these two maps up is that, look, even our maps, our general maps, are lying to us. Forget about the layout and the shape of the world. The maps aren't even true. They're trying to get this other one. They're trying to get this into the classroom because they're saying, oh yeah, by the way, this is what the world really looks like, and it freaks people out. But it's true. This isn't even a point of debate. So anyway, I'm going to get back to the other map, and that is, so for map makers, what I did was I was looking at maps of the world, and I noticed that in the wiki map projections, there was something called the azimuthal equidistant, this map right here. And it was a very, very interesting map because it was proposed by a scientist 1,000 years ago named Al-Biruni, who, pull him up. People don't understand what that guy looks like. He was a Persian scientist 1,000 years ago, right? And you're thinking, well, so what, right? So he proposed a flat Earth map 1,000 years ago. The thing is, though, what you're looking at here is not the flat Earth map. This is a map that the United States Geological Service, the USGS, is using as their reference map for the world. And you're thinking, okay, that doesn't make any sense. Well, it doesn't make sense because this is also, if you click over here, the identical map. This is the flat Earth map used by the Flat Earth Society, and it's literally the same map. No difference between those two maps. And let me look here real quick. I didn't have the UN flag in front of me, but I'll dig it up. Give me 1 second. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay. Give me 1 second. I'll pull up the UN flag. Come on, UN flag. Darn it. One moment. Sorry, I should have had this in front of me. Map makers.
Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, I'm gonna pick a different one though. Oh, this one's pretty good. We'll use this one. So it's also the map. Not only is it used by the USGS, but it's also used by the United Nations as their flag. And it's, in fact, if you look at the map projections, it's the only image that is used by any group. So it's not only used by the United States, as their map of the world. It's used by the United Nations as their flag. and if you look at the United Nations flag, which is, it's very, very obvious, there's no Antarctica on this map.
Mm-hmm.
At all. It's not on the out, is it assumed? Is it on the outer edge? Is it supposed to be these giant wreaths, in my opinion, a symbolism of, what's actually out there, this giant barrier that's surrounding the whole thing? But that's what Clue 3 goes into, is the maps. It's one of those curious head scratcher things where, I point at it. But anyway, do you want me to keep going down the list?
Yeah, keep going.
Okay. Clue 4 is Shell Beach, and that goes into simulations of a dome-like structure that have been used in Hollywood over the years. The most notable being Dark City, which I think is actually an Australian film. Dark City, which was done in the 90s, and it was also done by The Truman Show, which everybody knows, where a person is born into an enclosed world, and he lives there absolutely ignorant to the entire situation, because why would he believe anything else? It touches on how people can be born into a system, if it's an enclosed system, and never understand it. They believe what they're told. So if they're told the Earth is square, they're going to believe the Earth is square. But you have to tell them early, because if you don't tell them early enough, it's way harder to convince somebody. Because if you're looking at really a flat horizon the entire time, then if somebody came up to you, when you're 15 or 18, it showed you a globe, would you believe the globe? And it wouldn't be easy. Number 5 is Status Quo. That goes into sort of the reasoning behind why it's hidden, which is really just a fundamental shift in world thinking and world power. Because if you're trying to discover the outer edge, if you're trying to discover the enclosed system, you are coming from a science background. You're coming from a very structured government background. You know that there's a chance you're going to lose these things. And so number 5 goes into what might happen if that happened. There would be certain science divisions that would be shut down immediately. Forget about just NASA and their subcontractors. Every college that had an astrophysics or an astronomy department, those would be shut down immediately. There'd be a huge shift to spirituality, because there's so many, like you mentioned, Lisa, so many religious texts have brought it up over the years that all the religions would really latch on to it. It wouldn't be just Christianity. It'd be anybody that mentioned it in the past, they would dig it out of their text and they would say, look, we knew it since day one. And that scares the authority horribly. And so that goes into the decision-making process. Number 6 was depth perception, because people were asking me, well, how thick would the model have to be? And I really went into, it wouldn't have to be thick at all. And I went into geologic processes. So most notably volcanic processes, because people will say, well, in a flat model, wouldn't you leave, volcanoes and molten rock to be a natural formation? I was going, why would you do that? You want everything to be controlled. You want everything to be, if you're going to control one thing, you're going to do it all. I mean, if you're going to spend the time to build an 8,000 mile wide enclosed system, you're really going to leave, molten rock to chance? No, it's all going to be, all going to be controlled at some levels.
And at this point, it's good to mention too that according to the research you did, we have not dug down past 8 miles.
No.
Nowhere on the planet anybody ever has ever.
Yeah. That's another thing. Excellent point. People don't understand that there are certain things that are assumed by science that it's just ludicrous. They're telling you they know what the cross section of this globe is. That they say, oh yeah, we know exactly what what's going all the way through it. But if you look at the actual definition of the geologic system on Wiki, they skirt the issue. They say, oh well, we're extrapolating. And the reason they're extrapolating is no one has drilled below 8 miles anywhere. In the military, may have been able to figure out something, but they're not talking about it, that's for sure. Publicly, there has never been a hole by any mining corporation. Mining corporations, they got state-of-the-art stuff, has gone below 8 miles, because at 8 miles, it gets too hot and the drill bits start failing. They can't do anything because, they just start turning into clay and it just, it fails. But and so it's like, okay, well, if you are not drilling down further than 8 miles, which I would expect, everything in the design came out like expected, because you don't want people to just keep drilling for, and eventually reach something. So you just keep gradually increasing the temperature to the point where they can't drill any further. or they run into molten rock, and that discourages them from doing anything. So on a flat model,
where this leaves us really, no, I'm just sort of trying to recap on where this leaves us in terms of what we've been told officially.
Yeah.
We don't know what's below us
Nope.
further than 8 miles.
Nope.
We don't.
Nope.
We don't know if it's a globe.
Nope.
We don't know what really is hanging out there on the bottom. Not for sure.
Nope.
And if it's flat, we don't know what's beyond this ice edge that goes right around.
No, and a lot of people have been asking me that. And I've got my theories on it, but we'll get to that in a minute.
When it comes to going up,
we're going
serious questions about how far we can really go. And
exactly. The people that are controlling, let's put it, when it comes to going up, no private corporation is involved. So, and what I mean by that is the part of the whole NASA thing, was NASA was created to stop, to completely control private companies from doing that. And that was, in their defense, that was a great proactive move, even though back in the 60s and 70s, no one could have ever accomplished it because you need billions, you need a lot of money. It wasn't until
Virgin?
I'm sorry, what?
What about Virgin?
Yeah, like Virgin or SpaceX, those guys. When they got to a certain point, it's like, oh yeah, let's do something with NASA, especially since, NASA shut down the space shuttle program. Why'd they shut down? No one's talking about that. But you would make sure at the very least that if these private space programs, started up, at that point, you were so far into the game that you could infiltrate them if you wanted to, because, like SpaceX and the Virgin, team, they got to recruit from somewhere. And, how easy would it be to, just, pull some of your guys and saying, okay, you're going to work for this team. You're going to cause delays. You're going to cause, accidents. You're going to do anything you can, because you cannot allow people, you control the information. You cannot allow people in the private sector to get up that high. You can't. It's too dangerous, because if somebody found out, then you've got a security risk. So, and they've done a great job of that so far. So.
Okay. Moving on.
Number 7 was the long haul, which I ended up doing as a 2-parter. Long haul, and then number 9 was the magic show. But long haul talked about something. Again, it's something that's been missed, and I'm flipping the globe over to show the southern hemisphere here, which talks about the GPS system, but it also talks about travel routes. And that is, if it's a flat, because I remember I was looking for, if I wanted to hide the world. If I want to hide an enclosed model, there's certain things you have to look for. One, of course, is there can't be any legitimate space program. And for those out there, that don't know exactly what I'm talking about, please look into it. The Apollo missions are ridiculous. The International Space Station footage they've been releasing is horrible. It's just awful.
It's actually
really
very humorous.
It's just the permed. I guess 2 words. 2 words. Permed hair. There are. Anyway, that's a tangent.
We're obviously sponsored by some hairspray company.
Oh, there were 3 better ways you could have handled that, but it doesn't really matter. The second thing you want to look for in an enclosed model is no pictures of the Earth from space, because you can't. And that holds true. There was only one assumed picture from space ever, and the rest are all composites. Feel free to look it up. There's wonderful videos on that. The third thing,
they're very open about the fact that they're composites.
Yeah, and they're very open. They're composites, and people people just don't make the leap. They just don't understand it. And believe me, they're nervous about this, because this was not a secret that was going to be able to be kept forever, because because we all live here. Meaning, here, let me get out of this for a second. Because we all live here, it's like trying to hide something from your roommates, if that makes sense. It's like trying to hide something from inside your own apartment from your own roommates. You can't hide something forever, like a teddy bear or a pack of cigarettes or whatever you want. Sooner or later, somebody's accidentally going to find that. But the biggest, most obvious one was in a globe model, there are shortcuts. Meaning, if you're traveling from, say, South America to Australia, you're just going across the South Pacific Ocean. It's super easy. It's a straight shot. It's only 7,400 miles. But and you can go the other way too. The globe, you have different ways of going around this. But if it's pancaked and it's a flat model, then there's only one way to go. And that's where things start getting weird. I was going, well, if it's pancaked, then they can't lie about the flight routes, especially since on a flat model. And here, let me pull this up again. Sorry. Can you see that?
The flat, yes.
Yeah. So on a flat model, what we're looking at here is if this is literal, and you're thinking, well, no, it's just a squished version of the globe. No, if this is literal, if this is flat or way more flat than it is a globe, then the distance between Australia over here and the distance between South America over here is way longer than it should be. Meaning it's way longer. This distance is not the same as going across the ocean, because you notice if let's say I want to go across the ocean, it would take this really weird long roundabout way. Basically, this distance right here, this doesn't become 7,400 miles anymore. It becomes much longer. So you have to trick people into thinking that they are going, 7,400 miles. But the only way you can do that is you have to cut across. Right? You have to cut across the middle. And that doesn't make any sense, especially if you're looking at a globe. If you're looking at a globe to get from South America to Australia, you don't go over the North Pole, or you don't go near the North Pole, or you don't go across North America. But on a flat map, you do. And that's where everything starts to fall apart for these guys, because there's certain...
Explains why if you try to leave Australia, you always end up in Dubai.
Yeah. There's two ways they hide it. The one is obvious, and the other one's not so obvious. The one that's obvious is you make sure there's connections. So traveling from here to here may seem ridiculous if it's nonstop, but if you connect through the Middle East or North America, so why in the world, if you're going from Sydney to Buenos Aires, would you go through San Francisco? It doesn't make any sense unless you're on this map. If you're on this map, it makes perfect sense, because you're going from here, you're going to San Francisco, and then you're going, a little jog over here to South America. And 95%, people look this up, try to book a flight from somewhere in South America to somewhere in Australia, and 95% of the time, you will run into connections. And they will be ridiculous connections. They won't make any sense. And the flight times are ridiculous. It's supposed to be on a globe, it's supposed to be a 12-hour flight. 7,400 miles. But if you're doing this on a flat model, there'll be some connections that take you 3 days. And, they'll bounce you over with huge layovers all over the place. Unfortunately, you can't do it with 100% of the flights, because it's going to raise too many eyebrows. So what you do is you make some nonstops. But there's a problem with nonstops, and that is nonstop means you literally will have to fly this route, and you're going to confuse a lot of people, including the pilots. So what they do is, and this is where it gets real clever, is there's a site called, in fact, let me pull it up here. There's a site called planetracker.net. Can you see that one, that screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, planetracker.net. It tracks real time, and people can open this up at 24 hours a day, real time. Every flight, every commercial flight in the world, we're assuming that, some of the Russian ones, they're on their own thing. But every commercial flight in the world gets tracked in this in real time. So you can zoom in and you can see all the planes. Well, there's a problem with this map. And ignore the yellow and the red colors. For whatever reason, the United States delays its flight information by 5 minutes. So that's what it says when you see the yellow flights. But down in these southern oceans, the South Pacific Ocean, the South Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, there's nothing there. And you're thinking, and you look up in the Northern Hemisphere, there's planes flying all over the place. But down here, it's a ghost town, and you can't figure out why. And so I spent about a week staring at this.
Okay, yeah, see, I think I see what you're saying. The North Pacific Ocean has planes.
Oh, yeah.
All over the ocean.
Yeah.
South Pacific's got nothing.
There's nothing there. And you're thinking, well, this must have been just, this is a frame in time. This isn't the live shot, but you can pull up the live shot today, and it's not going to look any different right now. And it takes 5 seconds. But the reason why I was doing this was people saying, well, there's nonstops, from like Santiago, Chile to wherever. That's the big one, because there's only a handful of nonstops, and that should raise the flags right there. People should look, in America, the Northern Hemisphere, we can get nonstops anywhere. It's just a question of the cheapest one. The Southern Hemisphere, there's some cities you cannot get nonstops to. From key cities like Sydney to certain parts in South America, literally no nonstops any day. It doesn't really matter. There's a handful of nonstops, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, how are you hiding the fact that, hold on a second here. How are you hiding the fact, if you're doing a nonstop flight from South America to Australia, how are you hiding this? Because you can't allow the GPS system to track it. right? You cannot allow this plane to fly over this on a nonstop because sooner or later someone's going to notice. So what they did was, and this is the clever part, they turned them off. So every flight in the southern hemisphere, as soon as they get offshore, I think it's like 150, 200 miles, they just disappear. The logs are erased, they drop off the map, and they are not tracked. And they are not tracked literally until an hour from their destination when, all of a sudden, out of the blue, they pop back on the map and everything's great again and nobody questions it.
So are you telling me that you could sit in front of your computer and watch a plane take off from, say, New York?
Yep.
And travel across the North Atlantic?
Oh yeah, yeah. These planes
watch it in real time, traveling right across the ocean, and have it land somewhere in Europe.
Yeah.
But if it takes off from Sydney,
yep,
and it's supposedly just going over the South Pacific,
yep,
to Chile, it'll disappear and then reappear.
It has to. And this is every once in a while I will defend these guys for the decisions they make, because it's the lowest maintenance of the decisions they could have gone with. And that is, it has to disappear because you can't show them how the plane is getting from point A to point B for the nonstops. So, but unfortunately they had to do it for all of them. So even though there's just a handful of nonstops that would screw people up, they can't draw attention to these nonstops by making them disappear. So what they do is, anything below the equator, anything goes over the ocean, every flight is erased, every one of them, and it's for them it's a necessary evil. Unfortunately, there's been people that have been taking notice the last couple of years, and I had to at least talk about it, because it's it's, for me, it's also a question of safety. It's like, look, it's kind of a sore subject with some people. We looked at Malaysian flight. That wasn't on the GPS system. Not a chance. Nothing's there. There's nothing ever down here. You can look for days and days. There's a little island off of Madagascar. That's a perfect example. People say, oh, there's a plane in the Indian Ocean sometimes. No, it's not. It's on an island. But when it leaves that island heading towards Madagascar, it disappears. It's ridiculous, but it's one of the rules. So the long way around, I'm trying to get back to this, is that you have to do that to protect the globe model. You cannot show people, again, if I'm pull up this model again, you can't show people that it's going from Australia to South America by going a straight shot, because if it's a nonstop, it's going to screw with their minds. People won't understand it. In fact, if you showed 100 people a plane going from here to here on a normal map, because it would have to go, oh God, how would it even go? It would go it'd go up and then down, right? Mm-hmm. So it'd be this weird arc on this map, and people wouldn't understand it. It's like, why in the world would a flight nonstop go over the United States and then back down to South America? It doesn't make any sense, but it absolutely makes sense here. And that for me was a giant thing, because every flight that I looked at, every angle, if it made sense here, then it just proved it out. And again,
it's going to make you wonder about pilots, though.
About what?
Pilots.
Oh, the pilots. Yeah, but think about it this way. I almost treat pilots like I do astronomers, because there's certain groups which will never ever buy into this, ever. Astronomers, obviously, because that's their job. Their whole job is like, well, we're a little ball in space and we're going to look at stuff. But for pilots, think of, and I talked about this in one of the videos, which was, if you're a pilot, think of the leap of faith you've got to make to do this. I mean, most of it's all autopilot now anyway. Remember the GPS system, the same one that's controlling this stuff here, the GPS system works against them. So the GPS, the entire plane flies itself. So most of the time they don't care. If they look below and they see something that doesn't make sense to them, what's the first thing they're going to think? They're going to think, they're wrong, or they must have dozed off, or something that, the leap out of this makes no sense to them. And if, let's say, you're the rare pilot that knows, who are you going to call? You're going to call the FAA? They'll ground you in 2 seconds. You're going to say, if you said, hey, there's something wrong with the GPS system, yeah, maybe they'll talk to you, but they're just going to give you the runaround. You go to the FAA and say, hey, by the way, I think the maps are wrong, and I think it's actually flat. The globe doesn't match up. oh yeah, you're going to be on
You're
a
out of a
desk.
job.
Yeah, you have a job. Period. It's never going to happen. So anyway, that was the long haul and the magic show. The magic show. In fact, number 9 I did deliberately. So if you're watching number 7, and I feel bad because some people have contacted me after number 7 and said, oh, they keep mentioning that Santiago Chile flight, even though it's like, what, you didn't understand that, there's only like 5 nonstops in the entire Southern Hemisphere. But because they kept bringing it up, I had to do number 9, and number 9 was specifically to deal with. That's how I found the GPS being shut off, and it's still shut off today. And I don't imagine they're going to fix it anytime soon. And then number 10 was Hiding God, probably my most controversial one, which really went into the religious texts, more specifically the firmament, but it was more of a wake-up call to people. I said, look, if you've gone through 1 through 9 and the guide, then there's certain things you can do to see if this thing can be more revealed, more wide open. The first of which is to talk about what we were just talking about, the GPS system. It's like, look, contact your representatives and say, look, we've got fellow citizens. You don't say flat Earth, but we've got fellow citizens that are flying without GPS over oceans. Supposedly. So what's the deal there? Just kind of get that buzz going. The second one was contact anybody in the resource industry. You know how oil companies are. I mean, there's no way in a million years that an oil company does not have the lobbying power to get anywhere. They're trying to, up in the States, they're trying to get into national parks, and they're winning. They're going to get into the national parks. And these same guys who have unlimited resources, you're telling me they can't get into Antarctica where there's nothing environmentally, it's all under an Environmental Protection Act now, but in 1959 it wasn't. But now it's like, what are you damaging? There's no animal life. There's no plant life. There's no indigenous population. There's no old ruins anywhere. There's supposedly nothing. But you can't risk having these companies go down there, because if somebody strayed off course accidentally with a helicopter or a plane, it could get ugly. But that shows you how big it is. And then the third thing for number 10 was, the churches. I'm sorry, where they said, look, this is kind of a big deal, because from a religious standpoint, it's a big deal. If some sort of barrier was found, if intelligent design was found, the thing that science and religion have been butting heads about for years, then is it really fair that science hid it? I mean, let's call it what it is. I mean, if it is an enclosed structure, well, then the question of any spiritual, the God side of the equation, that just all of a sudden materializes instantly, and science has a lot of explaining to do, and I think it would be in religion's best interest to see if they could sort this out. But that was my take, and so yeah, I've gotten a few letters about that saying I might be on, getting myself into trouble there.
Well, hopefully we've given people enough reasons to start questioning.
I hope so.
And the research is out there, and the explanations are there for the seasons, the equinoxes, the precession, a day and night. They're all explained on how this works on a flat Earth model. And I'm just going to share my screen for a minute, because I've got an image here. Where is it? This one. Now, I think this is an older Vedic. Vedic.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I see it. Yeah.
And because this is one of the questions that comes up. Okay, so where do the stars come from? Where does the sun and the moon, where does everything sit, the other planets? And this is one concept, but it's a very common one throughout history and with all the different cultures and religions, is something along these lines. So what you've got is the flat Earth. You've got what they call, you got different layers, essentially. And the Vedics even made, once upon a time, a device that kind of looked like, or was put together like a clock. and you had these different plates that represented each of the different layers. You had one for the Earth, you had the planetary layer, the sun, the moon, and everything sat on top of one another. And when you look down through the center of this device, and you could move each of the layers as things were supposedly moving around and above the Earth. And they were incredibly, incredibly accurate. And these devices are 1,000 or more years old. But here's where it starts to get, oh my God, really interesting. All the implications of this, and all the people that it brings into question. I mean, first, to pull off a lie like this, you've got to have every space agency on the Earth involved.
Yep.
But at the same time, I can imagine your average staff member of NASA, for example, working in one of those huge rooms and it's full of screens. They don't know where the information being fed to those screens is coming from. If they're told it's from a camera that's roaming on Mars or wherever, but they don't know.
No, it's a need to know basis. And if you don't mind me jumping in just for a second here, let me show you something. Please. I'll give you an example, and one of these days he's going to figure it out. I'm using his name. But I had a neighbor whose name was Wayne Ottinger, and he was about as deep into NASA as you can. There's Neil, there's Buzz, there's Wayne. That was my neighbor. Took care of his cat. And Wayne, what was he doing? He built this. If people recognize this is the Lunar Landing Research Vehicle. This was the prototype for what they were going to use when they're landing on the moon, which was very interesting. Now, they didn't use this model, which I think was strange because they spent years on it, millions and millions of dollars. But from a production standpoint, you couldn't use this model because it was a convertible, really. This little thing here was just like a little wheelhouse. There wasn't really much to it. But the point is that even though he was about as close to these guys as you could get, these two guys were the only, it was a need to know basis. So he was the garage mechanic that was building all this stuff, but there was no reason to tell him and his buddy over here, whereas you had Neil and Buzz who had to be told eventually, because when they initially started the program, they were going to be heroes, and I feel bad because Neil Armstrong, it obviously weighed on him for years and years, all the way to his dying day. But I'm sorry, to more to your point though, absolutely, from a NASA or any space organization, the need to know is compartmentalized to the point where there's just a handful of people that would know. I mean, honestly, as far as even the people that are faking the stuff on ISS, on the International Space Station, the people that are going up in those flight simulator things, simulating anti-gravity, would you even need to tell them? All you have to do is say, look, you sign a non-disclosure, you're going to act like we tell you to act. But if they asked them why, I don't think they tell them. It's too big to tell them. As far as real high department heads in NASA, then yeah, maybe. And as far as other space agencies, look up, have some fun, guys. Look up Chinese space bubbles on YouTube. The fact that it appears that just about every simulated exterior shot from any space agency is shot in the underwater simulator, which James Cameron helped perfect, because he figured out if you put layers of rubber balls on the top of the pool like he did when he simulated the movie The Abyss, you can simulate perfect darkness or anything you want, or a perfect setting for a green screen. It's quite clever. Or people look up the people miss this, which was JAXA, JAXA, the Japanese moon space program that supposedly sent HD cameras around the moon. And everything goes through NASA. That's the big key here. If you're a country and you're doing a space program, you have to go through NASA. You do not do it independently. They tell you what to do. They show you how to do it, because it's not real. They're not dumb. They're not going to let you fire a rocket up and just crash. So anyway, sorry. That was my little tangent.
Well, there's several things this brings into question. Whistleblowers.
Yeah.
a couple of which I've even interviewed, who have talked about being on Mars. Now, one of the interesting things about the interview I did with Andrew Basiago, the Jump Room to Mars whistleblower, towards the end of that interview, he mentioned that they discovered while they were on Mars through firing a weapon that it hit the ceiling. And they realized they were in an enclosed environment.
When they were on Mars or when they were on Earth?
Mars.
Okay.
And I said, well, then how can you be sure you're on Mars? If you're in an enclosed environment, that could be an enclosed environment anywhere. And I didn't get an answer to my satisfaction on that one. So to me, I mean, they were put, he's put into an elevator for 30 minutes. I think he believes it. I'm not doubting what he believes was his experience.
Sure.
But there's nothing, I don't think there was anything that he could really, really, really say that was definitive evidence that he was not on this planet. Based on the experience, based on his observations, that could have been a major psyop that was done on him and his colleagues.
Think of it this way, and I've got a couple of more examples for you. If you wanted to fake it, there's certain things you'd want to do on a regular basis. One is you would want to have regular stories. And the fact that every major newspaper or internet thing has, they have weather, they have business, and they have space. And just about every month, NASA's making some sort of announcement about something, right? To make sure it's reinforced in your head that that they're still relevant and viable and all this stuff. But it also reinforces, it's like, oh yeah, right, we're still in space. Oh yeah, right, we're still in space. But there's also a couple other clever things you can do. And whoever thought of this, really, I hope they get a raise for these ideas. And that is, you can plant stories that raise people's attention. Like, for example, the face on Mars, right? That great story. Or that weird hexagram thing at the top of Saturn, right? And people understand, it's like, well, one, where are those pictures coming from, right? Obviously, but it's a layer that they're putting in that people completely bypass. It's not the face on Mars that's important. It's not the weird thing of the hexagram on the top of Saturn that's important. What's important is you're looking at it and going, hey, that's strange, but you're going, well, it's strange that, out in space, it's reinforcing the fact, the globe model. That's all it's doing. People making, well, it's assumed, I'm looking at the face on Mars, which immediately makes this a given. If there's a face on Mars and that's real, that means I'm obviously on Earth. And that's reinforced time and time again. Oh yeah, we sent out space probes past Neptune. Oh wow, I'm immediately on a globe. They do it through association, and that part is clever because it's from a psyop point of view. They don't have to try very hard because most people believe this anyway. If you believe it.
I've got to find that image that I just brought up for you again because there's something I wanted to point out.
Yeah.
Where did it go? Damn. I just lost it. Where did it go? You keep talking. Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's a great little nugget. So again, just look at the news and go back in time in regular interviews. Regular intervals. NASA always mentions these things. Oh, we've got a probe here. Oh, we've got something coming back here. Oh, let's not forget the Mars rover, which apparently was supposed to have shut down like 5-6 years ago, something even more than that. It's like, oh yeah, it's still running. We're still doing stuff with it. It's like, when you believe, they're putting your suspension of disbelief out. Oh, your screen sharing. Out so far that that you immediately come back to this, and that is, if you're thinking about something on Mars, if you're thinking about something on Neptune, then this already happened, and people miss it, and it's like, because we've been conditioned for so long, it's like, oh, it's a given, they just keep feeding it into you. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, when I looked at this image, I thought something about this was interesting because if you've been a conspiracy theorist long enough, you